Ernst Keller's hands were trembling, not from the cold. Berlin's April chill had already seeped into his bones hours ago. The trembling came from the paper he held, the order bearing the Führer's signature. All bridges over the Spree River are to be destroyed. Not a single crossing shall be left for the enemy. Keller folded the paper and slipped it into his jacket's inner pocket. Before him, the Oberbaumbrücke stretched into the darkness. Stone pillars, iron beams, standing since 1896. Ernst's grandfather had worked on this bridge's construction. Now Ernst would blow it to pieces. But the bridge wasn't the problem. The problem was the 10,000 German civilians trapped behind it. Soviet forces were advancing from the city's east. Half of Berlin was already under siege. Civilians in the Friedrichshain district were trying to flee west toward American and British lines. But there was only one way out. This bridge. And Keller's orders were clear. The bridge would be gone by dawn. Ernst walked to the bridge's center. His footsteps echoed on the stone surface. 3 soldiers accompanied him. The youngest was 17. The other 2 were over 50. Wounded veterans pulled from hospitals and sent to the front. There were no young soldiers left in Berlin. They were all dead, captured, or lost on the Eastern Front. "Herr Hauptmann," the young soldier said. His voice cracked. "Where should we place the dynamite?" Ernst studied the bridge's support columns. His engineer's eye calculated 4 main points. 10 kilograms of explosives at each. The bridge would collapse in 3 seconds. The water below would carry away the debris. It was a perfect demolition plan, but it would also be a perfect catastrophe. "Begin," Ernst said. His voice came out flat, emotionless, a commander's voice. But inside, a storm was raging. The soldiers started hauling dynamite packages. Ernst walked to the bridge's eastern end. In the darkness, he could hear distant sounds, screams, crying, footsteps. Thousands of people were coming toward this bridge. A woman emerged. She stepped out of the darkness, a small child in her arms, maybe 3 years old. The woman was running. Behind her came another. An old man, then a family, then a group, then hundreds. Ernst froze. He stood at the bridge's edge. People were running toward him, panic in their eyes, fear of death, the instinct to survive. "Herr Hauptmann," the young soldier said. "What do we do?" Ernst couldn't answer. He just watched. The woman passed by him. The child was crying. The old man stumbled. Ernst reached out and caught him. The man looked at him, gratitude in his eyes. Then he continued running. More were coming, hundreds, thousands. Ernst grabbed his radio, connected to headquarters. "This is Keller. At Oberbaumbrücke. Thousands of civilians are on the bridge. I need to postpone the demolition." The voice on the other end was cold. "No postponement. The Soviets will be there in 2 hours. The bridge must be destroyed before dawn." "But the civilians, clear the civilians, then detonate. The order is final." The line went dead. Ernst threw the radio to the ground. The young soldier looked at him. He was scared. So were the other 2. "What do we do, Herr Hauptmann?" Ernst looked at the bridge. People were still coming, streaming across. Most were women and children, the elderly, the wounded, what remained of Berlin. "Place the dynamite," Ernst said. His voice was hoarse. "But don't detonate. Not yet." The soldiers went to work. Ernst sat at the bridge's edge, put his head in his hands, thought, calculated, made plans. The order was clear. He had to blow the bridge. But the order meant condemning 10,000 people to death. And Ernst Keller was an engineer. He dedicated his life to building bridges. Now he was destroying them, and not just bridges of stone. People's hope of survival. An hour passed. People were still crossing the bridge. Ernst counted each one. 3,847 people. Exactly. They were all on the western side now, safe, but more were coming. The young soldier approached. "Herr Hauptmann, Soviet tanks are on Warschauer Straße, 5 kilometers away." Ernst stood up. The radio rang. Headquarters calling again. "Keller, status report. Has the bridge been destroyed?" "No." "What?" "Detonate immediately. That's an order." "Civilians are still crossing." "Forget the civilians. Blow the bridge now." Ernst turned off the radio. He pressed his hands against the bridge's cold iron. Something broke inside him, maybe the last thing remaining, the culture of obedience. The 17-year-old soldier looked at him. Herr Hauptmann, if you don't follow the order, they'll execute you. Ernst smiled. It was a bitter smile. I know. Then why? Because, Ernst said, I didn't build this bridge. But if I don't destroy it, 10,000 people will live. And maybe that will be the only right thing I've done in this war. The soldiers looked at him silently. No one spoke. Then one of the old veterans stepped forward. I'm staying with you, Herr Hauptmann. The other nodded. Me too. The 17-year-old boy looked through his tears. Then he nodded too. All of us. Ernst looked at them. 4 men, 4 soldiers, all condemned to death, but all had made a choice. Humanity. 2 more hours passed. Dawn was breaking. People were still coming. Ernst counted each one. 8,931 people. All had crossed the bridge. All were alive. Then came the sound of tanks. Soviet T-34s. They appeared at the end of the street. Their guns turned, aimed at Ernst. Ernst looked at the detonator button. He could still blow it. The tanks couldn't cross. Maybe they could defend Berlin for a few more hours, but people were still on the bridge. The last group, maybe 100, maybe fewer, all running. Ernst touched the button. His fingers trembled. The tanks fired. The first shell landed beside the bridge. Water splashed. The second was closer. Ernst watched the people. The last woman crossed the bridge. The last child. The last old man. Now the bridge was empty. Ernst pressed the button. Nothing happened. The young soldier looked at him. Herr Hauptmann? Ernst smiled. You didn't place the dynamite, did you? The soldiers looked at him silently. Then the old veteran shook his head. No, sir, we didn't. Ernst laughed. For the first time, maybe the first genuine laugh in years. Good. The tanks approached the bridge. Soviet soldiers jumped out, raised their weapons. Ernst stood in the bridge's center, hands in the air, his 4 soldiers beside him, all surrendered. A Soviet officer approached, shouted something in Russian. Ernst didn't speak Russian, but he understood. Why didn't you blow it? Ernst looked at the bridge, at the western side, where 10,000 people had escaped. Because, he said, some things are more important than orders. The Soviet officer frowned. He didn't understand. But it didn't matter, because for the first time Ernst Keller was at peace with his conscience. They took him away, with his 4 soldiers, loaded them into a truck, drove through Berlin's streets. Ernst looked out the window. The city was burning, ruins everywhere, death on every corner. But somewhere, 10,000 people were alive. 10,000 people that Ernst Keller had saved by not blowing a bridge. The truck stopped in front of a building, Soviet headquarters. They took Ernst inside, to a room, bare walls, a single table, 2 chairs. A general entered, his uniform covered with medals. He sat down, looked at Ernst. Your name? Hauptmann Ernst Keller, Wehrmacht Engineering Corps, Ots. Why didn't you destroy the bridge? Ernst answered honestly. Because 10,000 civilians were crossing. The general looked at him for a while, then pulled out a file, opened it. Inside were photographs. Ernst's file, his military history. You've been fighting since 1939. You were in France, you were in Russia. Everywhere you built bridges. For the Wehrmacht. Why now? Ernst thought. A long silence. Then he spoke. Because I finally remembered what bridges are for. To connect people, not to separate them, never to kill them. The general nodded, wrote something, then stood up. You'll be treated as a prisoner of war. Not a war. Criminal. Because what you did tonight was humanity. Ernst was surprised, but relieved. His 4 soldiers would receive the same treatment. They sent him to a prisoner camp in the east, west of Siberia. He stayed there for 2 years. Released in 1947. Returned to Berlin. The city was in ruins, rubble everywhere. Most bridges had been destroyed. Oberbaumbrücke was still standing. Soviet tanks had crossed it but hadn't blown it up. It was still there. Ernst walked onto the bridge, touched the stone pillars, the iron beams, still solid, still standing. A woman passed by him, looked at Ernst, then stopped, turned back. You're that officer, aren't you? The one who didn't blow the bridge that night? Ernst was surprised. How do you know? Because I crossed that night with my son. He was 3 years old. Now he's 5. We're alive because of you. Ernst's eyes filled with tears. The woman extended her hand, shook Ernst's hand. Thank you. Then she left. Ernst cried. For the first time. Maybe the first time since the war. Years passed. Berlin was rebuilt. Ernst built new bridges. Stone bridges. Iron bridges. For each one, he applied the same principle. To connect people, not to separate them. In 1961, the Berlin Wall was erected. Ernst watched. The city divided in two. Families separated. Bridges closed. Ernst cried, because this wasn't what bridges were for. In 1989, the wall fell. Ernst was 82 years old that day. He went to Oberbaumbrücke. The bridge had reopened. People were crossing, east to west, west to east, freely. Ernst stood in the bridge's center, touched the stones with his hands, closed his eyes, remembered. That night, April 1945, 10,000 people, his 4 soldiers, and in that moment, he knew he had made the right choice. A young man approached, maybe 25 years old. Old man, are you all right? Ernst smiled. I'm fine. Just remembering. Remembering what? Ernst looked at the bridge. How this bridge was saved. The young man was surprised. You saved it? Ernst nodded. Me and 4 brave soldiers, by disobeying orders. Why? Ernst looked into the young man's eyes. Because sometimes giving orders is easy, but being human requires courage. The young man listened silently, then extended his hand. It was an honor to meet you. Ernst shook his hand. Then the young man left. Ernst remained alone on the bridge. Wind was blowing. It was cold, but Ernst wasn't cold, because inside he was warm, with the warmth of conscience. That night he returned home. To his small apartment, on the wall hung a photograph from 1945. A photo with 4 soldiers, taken in the prison camp. All were smiling. Ernst looked at the photograph. All 4 were dead now, but none were forgotten, because 10,000 people remembered them, and the children of those 10,000, and their children. Ernst lay down, closed his eyes, slept, and in his dreams he saw bridges, stone bridges, iron bridges, and on all of them people walked, freely, happily. In 1995, Ernst Keller died. He was 88 years old. Hundreds of people came to his funeral. Most didn't know him, but everyone knew the story. The officer who didn't blow Oberbaumbrücke, the man who saved 10,000 people. A woman gave a speech. She was around 50. In 1945, I was 3 years old. My mother carried me across that bridge. If Ernst Keller had followed orders that night, I wouldn't be here. My children wouldn't exist. My grandchildren wouldn't exist. Silence, then applause. Long applause. Ernst's coffin was buried beside Oberbaumbrücke. The headstone read, Ernst Keller, 1907 to 1995, built bridges, saved a bridge, defended humanity. And that bridge still stands, in Berlin, over the Spree River, connecting people, east to west, past to future. And everyone who crosses might not know, but that bridge is a monument to one man's courage, one man's choice, a man who chose between orders and conscience. Ernst Keller, the man who didn't blow the bridge, the man who saved 10,000 people, and the man history never forgot. The years between 1947 and 1961 were difficult for Ernst. Berlin was divided into 4 sectors: American, British, French, and Soviet. The Oberbaumbrücke became a border crossing between the Soviet and American sectors. Ernst worked as a civilian engineer, helping rebuild the city's infrastructure. But every project reminded him of what he'd lost. His wife had died during the bombing of Dresden in 1945. His son had been killed on the Eastern Front in 1943. Ernst was alone. But he wasn't entirely alone. The 4 soldiers who had stood with him that night in 1945 had survived the prison camps. They stayed in touch. Once a month, they met at a small cafe near the bridge. They never talked about the war. They talked about rebuilding, about the future, about hope. One of them, the young soldier who had been 17, was now studying architecture. His name was Klaus. He wanted to design bridges. "Herr Keller," Klaus said one afternoon, "why did you become an engineer?" Ernst thought about it. He sipped his coffee, looked out the window at the Spree River. "Because bridges connect things that are separated. Water separates land. War separates people. I thought, if I could build bridges, maybe I could bring things together." Klaus nodded. "And that night, when you chose not to blow the bridge?" Ernst smiled sadly. "That night, I realized something. Sometimes the best way to connect people is simply not to destroy what already connects them." Klaus wrote that down. Years later, he would become one of Germany's most respected architects, and on every bridge he designed, he placed a small plaque. It read, "Built to connect, never to divide." The other 3 soldiers also found their paths. One became a teacher, one became a doctor, one became a priest. All of them carried the same lesson from that night. Humanity matters more than orders. In 1961, when the Berlin Wall went up, Ernst watched from his apartment window. He was 54 years old. He saw soldiers stringing barbed wire, building concrete barriers, dividing families, dividing the city. He cried that day, not just for Berlin, but for everything the war had destroyed, and for what people continued to destroy in the name of ideology. The Oberbaumbrücke became part of the border. Closed, guarded, no one could cross. Ernst stopped going there. It hurt too much to see, but he never stopped building. In West Berlin, he designed and constructed 12 bridges. Each one was stronger than necessary. Each one was more beautiful than required. Because Ernst believed that infrastructure should inspire hope, not just serve function. In 1975, Ernst received a letter. It was from the Soviet Union, from a man named Dmitry Volkov. The letter was in broken German. "Dear Herr Keller, I am the officer who captured you in 1945 at the Oberbaumbrücke. I have thought about you many times over the years. I want you to know you made the right choice. I lost my family in the war. 3 children. My wife. If someone like you had been in my country, maybe they would have lived. Thank you for being human when others were not." Ernst cried when he read that letter. He wrote back immediately. They began corresponding. Once a month, letters crossed the Iron Curtain. 2 old soldiers, enemies once, now friends, united by the memory of one bridge and one choice. In 1989, Ernst was 82. He was in his apartment when he heard the news. The Berlin Wall was opening. People were crossing, dancing, celebrating. Ernst put on his coat, walked slowly to the Oberbaumbrücke. It took him an hour. His legs were old. His back hurt, but he had to see it. When he arrived, thousands of people were on the bridge. East Germans crossing to the west. West Germans crossing to the east. Crying, hugging, reuniting with family they hadn't seen in decades. Ernst stood at the bridge's center, exactly where he'd stood in 1945. He closed his eyes, felt the vibrations of thousands of footsteps, heard the laughter, the joy. Someone tapped his shoulder. He opened his eyes. It was Klaus, now 58 years old, a successful architect. "Herr Keller, you should be here. I am here. No, I mean, you should be honored, recognized. You saved this bridge. You saved all those people. Without you, this moment wouldn't exist." Ernst shook his head. "The bridge saved itself. I just didn't get in the way." Klaus smiled, hugged the old man. "That's the most beautiful thing I've ever heard." They stood together, watched history happen, watched people cross freely, watched connection triumph over division. That night, Ernst went home. He sat at his desk, wrote a letter to Dmitry Volkov. "My dear friend, today the wall fell. Today the bridge opened. Today I saw what we fought for, not territory, not ideology, but this, the simple human right to cross a bridge and embrace someone you love. I wish you could have been here. I wish we could have crossed together, but I know in spirit you were there. Because 44 years ago, you chose to see me as human, not as enemy. And that choice, like mine, rippled forward through time. Thank you, my friend. Thank you. 3 weeks later, he received a response. Dmitri was coming to Berlin. In January 1990, they would meet. January came. Ernst waited at the train station. He was nervous. He'd seen Dmitri's face once in 1945, in the chaos of surrender. Would he recognize him? The train arrived. People poured out. Then he saw him. An old man, tall, white hair, walking with a cane. Their eyes met. They walked toward each other. Slowly, then Dmitri smiled, extended his hand. Herr Keller, General Volkov. They shook hands. Then, without thinking, they embraced. Two old men, former enemies, now brothers. They spent 3 days together, walked through Berlin, visited the Oberbaumbrücke, stood where they'd stood in 1945. I often wonder, Dmitri said, what would have happened if you'd blown the bridge? 10,000 people would have died. Yes, but I mean, what would have happened to you, to me? Would we have become friends? Ernst thought about it. I don't know, but I know this. The only reason we're friends now is because I chose humanity over orders, and you chose to honor that choice instead of punishing it. Dmitri nodded. We were both lucky to be tested and to pass. They stayed in touch. Dmitri visited Berlin 3 more times. Ernst never made it to Russia. His health was failing. In 1995, on April 15th, Ernst Keller had a stroke. He was in his apartment, alone. He fell, couldn't get up, but he wasn't scared. He looked at the photograph on the wall, the 4 soldiers, smiling in the prison camp. He looked at the letters from Dmitri, stacked neatly on his desk. He looked at the blueprints of all the bridges he'd built, rolled up in the corner. A life measured in connections, in choices, in moments when he'd chosen humanity over convenience. He closed his eyes, smiled. The ambulance found him 3 hours later. He died in the hospital that evening. The last thing he said was to the nurse holding his hand. Did I do enough? She didn't understand, but she smiled, squeezed his hand. Yes, you did enough. His funeral was held at a church near the Oberbaumbrücke. Hundreds attended. Dmitri flew from Moscow. Klaus delivered the eulogy. The priest who had been one of the 4 soldiers led the service. They buried him beside the bridge, as he'd requested. His headstone faced the water, so he could watch people cross forever. In the years after, a small memorial was built, a plaque. It told the story of April 1945, of Hauptmann Ernst Keller and his 4 soldiers, of the choice they made, of the 10,000 lives saved. School children visit it, tour groups, historians. They read the story, look at the old photographs, see the bridge still standing, and every year, on April 15th, people gather. They place flowers at Ernst's grave. They walk across the bridge. They remember. Because Ernst Keller proved something important, something the world needed to remember, especially in 1945, especially in Berlin, especially at war's end. That one person making one choice can change everything. That humanity, even in the darkest moment, even when orders demand otherwise, even when death is the penalty for mercy, humanity can prevail. The bridge still stands, the story still lives. And somewhere in the infrastructure of Berlin's rebuilt soul, Ernst Keller's spirit remains, building, connecting, refusing to destroy what binds us together. That's the legacy. Not of a soldier, not of an engineer, but of a human being who, when tested, chose correctly. Now, if you visit Berlin, walk to the Oberbaumbrücke, stand in its center, feel the vibrations of people crossing, listen to the laughter of children, watch lovers walk hand in hand, and remember, this bridge, this moment, this connection, it almost didn't exist. But one man said no to orders, yes to conscience, and changed history with that simple, courageous choice. Remember Ernst Keller. The man who saved a bridge by refusing to destroy it. The man who saved 10,000 people by disobeying orders. The man who proved that in the end, humanity always matters more than ideology. If you enjoyed this story, please like this video and subscribe to our channel for more untold stories from World War II. These moments of moral courage deserve to be remembered, celebrated, and passed down to future generations. Thank you for watching.